Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Laura Cohen, and I'm the Executive Director of the Harriet and Kenneth Kupferberg Holocaust Center at Queensborough Community College at the City University of New York. Our mission is to use the lessons of the Holocaust to educate current and future generations about the ramifications of prejudice, racism, and stereotyping. Today's event is entitled Queer Art, Curatorial Collaboration and Social Justice, and features a conversation with our guest speakers, Carmen Hermo and Levi Narine. The Kupferberg Holocaust Center in Bayside, New York, is situated on the traditional land of the Mantinecock people, who continue to live here today. We offer gratitude and respect to all of the Indigenous people of Turtle Island, past, present, and future, including the Lenape and Shinnecock peoples. What I just read is what we call a land acknowledgement. This is a statement recognizing that the land we all occupy in the course of our daily lives, including our schools, jobs, parks, homes, as well as the names of towns and roads, were first inhabited by another group of people who were forcibly expelled and murdered. Today, we identify those crimes for what they are: mass atrocities and genocide, the horrors of which continue to have devastating political, social, psychological, and economic impacts upon and within Native American and Indigenous communities. Today's program is co-sponsored by the Museum and Gallery Studies program in the Art and Design Department and the Office of Student Activities at Queensborough Community College. It's also the kickoff for our Human Rights in the Museum series, a powerful new collaboration with QCC's Museum and Gallery Studies program that builds upon the KHC's longstanding tradition of connecting core themes within both Holocaust and human rights education, of erasure and tragedy, of visibility and resilience, with how they are expressed and taught within museums and education centers. After the presentation, be sure to submit your questions via the Q&A feature on your screen. Now, please join me in welcoming Kat Griefen. She's the program coordinator and faculty member in the Gallery and Museum Studies program at Queensborough Community College and faculty member of Museum Studies in CUNY's School of Professional Studies. Kat?
Thank you so much, thank you so much, Laura. This is Dr. Laura Cohen, the incredible Executive Director of the Kupferberg Holocaust Center. We're really very grateful that she has been participating in putting this collaboration together. I also want to thank Victoria Fernandez, and I want to thank some of the members of the QCC Art and Design Department, Anne-Marie Coffey, Kenneth Powell, and Kathleen Wentrek, the chair of the department, for their support of this program, as well as our first two speakers in the series. Thank you for being the very first here today. So as Laura said, I am the faculty member and the program coordinator for the Queensborough Community College Gallery Museum Studies program. Here are just some images of our students and our alumni at work and at their academics. One image actually from when we visited the Brooklyn Museum, and Carmen so generously gave us a tour there. If folks would like to know more about this program, which is the only associate's degree in Gallery Museum Studies within the CUNY system, and thus one of the very few affordable entry points into our field, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm also very pleased to teach for the School of Professional Studies in CUNY's Museum Studies Master's program as well. So, of course, as a faculty person, I have to say thank you for being here to all of the many students from throughout CUNY and beyond, and all of our other folks who are here today. Again, just to go back to the topic, human rights in the museum, this being the first series in these new and exciting events, I want to share again that we build the series upon the KHC's mission, which you see here. We use the lessons of the Holocaust to educate current and future generations about the ramifications of unbridled prejudice, racism, and stereotyping. We have incredible museum curators and cultural workers in this and upcoming programs who will be addressing the roles of historical and cultural institutions can play in addressing human rights and social justice. I will also share as Laura also hinted at in her wonderful introduction, that this program comes out of a living land acknowledgement that the Kupferberg Holocaust Center is committed to, which resulted from a whole series of programs and an exhibition around Native American survivance that I was very pleased to collaborate on with many different voices. So there will be many Indigenous voices and viewpoints in this event series. This is the next of the 2 events that we have occurring this semester. I'm just going to share 2 slides, 2 images from the exhibition that Carmen and Levi will be discussing very briefly, and say how pleased I am that it is the Brooklyn Museum's exhibition that we discuss in this first program, because the institution and their wonderful curators and other staff have so generously welcomed many Queensborough Community College students for tours and programs, and even for internships in the past. So the speakers will be talking about Nobody Promised You Tomorrow, Art 50 Years After Stonewall. And of course, this exhibition commemorates the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising, a 6-day demonstration by members of the GLBTQ community in response to the raid on the Stonewall Inn. 1969, the Stonewall Uprising occurred only 25 years after the fall of the Nazi regime and the end of World War II. We now know that along with millions of Jews, disabled people, and other victims, thousands of gay people perished at the hands of the Nazis during the war. In addition to this unimaginable loss of life, Nazi persecution also devastated the queer artistic and cultural communities in Germany that have been developing between the wars. I share this slide of work by one artist from the Brooklyn Museum exhibition as just one example of how multiple later generations of GLBTQI artists and activists have resisted persecution. Here, the pink triangle with gay people had originally been forced to wear in concentration camps is recontextualized not only to address that particular historical moment, but also the deadly AIDS crisis of the 1980s. But at the same time, Electra KB offers us hope that comes through anger leading to action. With now the Holocaust only 25 years behind them in 1969, at the time of Stonewall, GLBTQ folks stood up to protect each other from police violence and to safeguard one of the few places that they could somewhat safely gather. They knew exactly what was at stake. What they couldn't have known at the time was that they would ignite a gay rights movement that continues today. And it is evident from the early revolt that 2 themes, community care and collaboration, have been key to the development of this movement. These are 2 of the major themes that Carmen and Levi will speak about as they address queer art, life, their museum work, and the impact of the Stonewall uprisings now 50 years past. I also look forward to our conversation around social justice and the role social justice plays in the museum, and also the role that these kinds of exhibitions and the impact these kinds of exhibitions can have outside of the walls of the museum. So very briefly, I'm so pleased to introduce both Carmen and Levi. They'll be speaking a little more directly and personally about the work that they are doing. But briefly, Levi is the former teen program assistant for InterseXtions, Brooklyn Museum's LGBTQIA+ teen program. And he also organized Our House, the specific resource room section of Nobody Promised You Tomorrow. Carmen is the associate curator of the Brooklyn Museum's Elizabeth A. Sackler Center for Feminist Art. She curated curated or co-curated parts of Roots of the Dinner Party, Nobody Promised You Tomorrow, Half the Picture, and many other important exhibitions. Previously, Carmen was the assistant curator for collections at the Guggenheim. She received her BA in art history in English from the University of Richmond and her MA in art history from Hunter College, CUNY. So I will stop the share now and allow you guys to go ahead and please take over and share your screen if you like. Thank you very much for being here and for speaking to us today.
Thank you so much, Kat and Laura, for the brilliant introductions, and Levi and I are really excited to be here. Levi and I connected these past few weeks talking about what we were going to go through, and it was like walking down the most beautiful memory lane. I can't believe this exhibition happened in 2019. It seems like it was just yesterday that we were celebrating Pride together at the Brooklyn Museum. But yeah, we want to kind of introduce ourselves a little bit, and I'm going to start just like a quick rundown of who I am, how I got where I am, pass it over to Levi, and then we'll share the PowerPoint with images and dig into the artworks of Nobody Promised You Tomorrow. So yeah, just to give you a brief update or additional information to the bio that Kat shared. I've been at the Brooklyn Museum for about 4.5 years now, and I really love being able to work in this kind of like resolutely feminist space, right? It's really unique. In fact, it's the only permanent museum space dedicated to feminist art in the world. It was that when it started in 2007, and still to this day, it's still the only one, but we see a lot of museums digging into kind of the important narratives that museums have historically left behind. But when I was in college, I went to University of Richmond. I was as was shouted out. I really didn't know that I was going to go into museum work. I was more interested in kind of journalism and writing, and thanks to a really great professor who, I was able to see that there was, an opportunity to think about like kind of a public museum career, right? Because I love speaking to the public. I really miss in-person tours and all that, but I love Zoom as kind of a more accessible way to connect with many more people. But I was able to build out kind of a focus in our history at the University of Richmond. They were very conservative in certain ways, and so I actually took their first ever contemporary art class in 2007, my last semester, and all of a sudden I'm leaving and my mind is being blown. Like, of course, I had seen and appreciated contemporary art elsewhere, but it was actually the internships I had after my kind of undergrad studies that really helped me focus on feminism, specifically at El Museo del Barrio uptown, connecting with Latina artists who were thinking about oppressive beauty standards and political histories of their lives, and kind of thinking, wow, like this is really powerful that artists are making work that is about the times that I am living in as well, and like kind of similar conditions to the one I see myself refracted in. And that was very life-changing, right? So from there, I was able to work through various museum positions. My first paid museum job was a year-long internship at the Museum of Modern Art, where I worked in their drawings department, doing a lot of curatorial research, doing a lot of behind-the-scenes collections work, which I really love. I think sometimes those narratives of what's not seen are just as interesting as what is seen in museums. And I, from there, worked, I think many of us can see too how the economy is, especially at museums, kind of is conducive to a little bit of leapfrogging, right? Like I had a year-long contract here, then I had a 2-year contract at the Whitney, then I found myself at the Guggenheim as a curatorial assistant, and there was able to kind of grow into my role. I spent 6 years at the Guggenheim, so I was really able to get to know the collection, get to know my colleagues, but also myself and my own kind of curatorial interests, and really sharpening into a much kind of more political and pointed point. Halfway through the Guggenheim, I realized I really should, or I want to get my master's. And so I was a student at Hunter for 4 years. It took me just over 4 years to finish the MA. And that really carried me forward into my work at the Brooklyn Museum. And so I'm really thrilled to be coming at you today with this incredible exhibition, Nobody Promised You Tomorrow, to be in conversation with Levi and to reflect on how this feminist space, in this case, this incredible exhibition was really showcasing kind of like a future of feminism and a really exciting sort of critical look at some of the sort of accepted narratives that you sort of just move forward and move through. So during Q&A, if folks want to talk further about any of that, all of it, other things, definitely down for questions, advice, whatever comes to mind, so don't be shy. But I'm happy to pass it to Levi.
Hey everyone, I'm Levi. So I grew up going to the Brooklyn Museum, and I actually was a teen intern back in high school. And I just absolutely love the community gathering and being interested in all these different exhibitions. And from there, although I have a fashion and fine jewelry background, I still wanted to be connected with the museum. And Lindsay, which is the teen programs manager at the Brooklyn Museum, reached out to me to connect with this exhibition, and it was super exciting. And I was so excited to do it. And yeah, that's how I jumped back into the museum and got involved. Yeah, and just a little bit about like what I'm doing right now. I'm currently a gemologist certified by the Gemologist Institute of America. I'm a fine jewelry specialist at The Real. And yeah.
Yes, and I think, I feel like our kind of comparative, contrast, parallel, experiences, I think really speak to that collaborative nature of what ended up being Nobody Promised You Tomorrow, right? It's like everybody brought their experiences, their insights, their contacts with the community, in Brooklyn and beyond. And it was really just like an incredible experience. I think without further ado, I'll share my screen so we can start looking at some art. I will introduce kind of the show, hit on some important artists. Wait, I did that wrong. And then pass it on over to Levi to talk about our house, and then we'll kind of be in conversation together from there. But it's really hard to be brief about some of these incredible artworks. So let's see how quick I can go through, because I know we want lots of time for questions. So you heard a little bit about Nobody Promised You Tomorrow. This artwork on the right was actually in that image that Kat shared. And this is a really important and exciting show that happened at the Brooklyn Museum in 2019. It was really an emotional and incredible experience from really the moment that it was proposed, right? As a curator, you propose an exhibition, you go through kind of like the various levels of review and all that great stuff. And what made this show so special really was the 50th anniversary, right? We knew that Stonewall was going to be celebrated across the globe in 2019. And even before 2019, many of us at the museum and of course in the world were noticing that there was a kind of very capitalist, corporate, if you will, celebration of pride, right? There was like flags everywhere. We were hearing about exhibitions that were going to be showcasing, 1969 and what was going on then. But I think what was so interesting to what would become the Curatorial Collective is the reality that, we're celebrating 50 years after the Stonewall uprising, when largely brown and black, trans, gender nonconforming, and queer folks, many of whom were homeless, living in Christopher Park across from Stonewall Inn, basically said enough, right? And how to really celebrate 50 years later if all of the conditions that they were fighting against, whether that's homelessness, lack of access to healthcare, transphobia, and certainly police brutality, because this all came out of continual abuses by the NYPD, all of that is still happening and it's still so endemic to especially queer and trans life today, especially for brown and black people. And so I kind of juxtapose these images to think about how we saw in 2020 an incredible outpouring of support for the Brooklyn Liberation March, and how, again, they're calling for survival, for protection, for an understanding of these conditions. And so in making Nobody Promised You Tomorrow, and here's kind of a slide with the 28 artists and collectives who were on view in the exhibition, and a shout out to the incredible Curatorial Collective, Margot, Lindsay, myself, Ali, and Lauren, and Levi. All of us really worked together. It was very interesting to kind of unpack and move away from the traditional like one curator model of like, I'm a curator with an idea and you have to listen to me, and instead kind of spread that expertise and knowledge and bring in folks who always showcase black and brown brilliance, queer and trans brilliance in their public programs. For example, in the case of Margot and Lauren, or for Lindsay, as we've already shouted out, leading our teen InterseXtions program, thinking about feminism in the context of young people and queer and trans liberation. I think this team really came together in a way that reflected, the collective model, as Kat was talking about, that pushed Stonewall forward and pushed us all into a better future. We were really thrilled that we were able to pay all the artists in the exhibition and also pull out 3 special commissions. So I'm going to kind of hit on all of this in some of the artworks that I touch on, but we were really interested in critiquing, again, this like overly celebratory 50th anniversary that was happening and kind of recognize how the problems still persist, but then also looking to artists, right, as we always do, look to artists for the answers of how we can get to a collective liberatory future. And so the show in some ways is about 50 years after Stonewall, but it's about what comes now, right? And what it means to be 50 years after Stonewall. And we actually decided to build the show only focusing on artists who were born after Stonewall. We felt like there were a lot of exhibitions already in the works that were looking at people who lived through it, if you will, but we were more interested in this generational shift. And so here you're seeing the Electric KB banner at the back of the pink triangle banner here. This is sort of what the galleries look like, by a lot of different material approaches, textile, video, street art, light box, sculpture, performance, music videos. Like, it was a very kind of lively install, which, you know, it's always hard to come through in the images, but the first section in the exhibition was called Revolt. And again, I'm going to do like a quick cruel skim on some of these very brilliant and complex works. But of course, with Revolt, we wanted to start out with the idea of the uprising, right? But complicate rather than just simply show kind of bodies in the street advocating for each other, for themselves. We wanted to think about what revolt looks like in kind of more resistance, refusal, survival, right? The idea that you can protect yourself, and protecting your community is a form of revolt. One of the works that kind of came to our minds very early on when we were as a collective building the checklist and talking about which artists wanted to be in the show was the epic Happy Birthday Marcia by Tourmaline and Sasha Wart-Sell, which basically reimagines and uses a bit of fiction to make Marsha P. Johnson, the epic Black trans sex worker and just sort of icon, and for many people, such an important part of the Stonewall uprising, to reimagine the night of Stonewall as her birthday. And so the video kind of recreates this moment where nobody's showing up to her birthday party. She's getting annoyed. She's been trying to invite people all day. Then they head over to the Stonewall Inn, and, you know, things explode from there. And so this was just a really important work to bring forward and show her work as a poet, as a performance artist, and allow people to have this entry into, you know, what is and what is not the Stonewall history, and to move forward from there into a place of reflecting it back on today, right? So Kat already shouted out these incredible works by Electric KB, and everything Kat said stands. You know, these are interesting works where Electric creates these to carry in protest. So for instance, the one on the right where we see this kind of Soviet woman stabbing the KKK, I actually saw that at the International Women's Day. So I guess, you know, back in 2017, we're on the anniversary of that day. And it did not have the text yet. And then later connecting with the artist and realizing that they had made this banner. And that was sort of an incredible moment. So in her practice, she then takes the work back into the studio, repairs it from being in the protest, and makes it into an artwork. So there's a lot of kind of repair, care that flows through the artworks in the show. The second section was called Heritage. In Heritage, we were engaging with queer and trans histories, and in tribute to that historical lineage, and thinking about building a bridge between these younger artists and the older historical figures that they were bringing into their practice and their work. So for instance, in the center here, you're seeing L.J. Roberts' epic Stormy at Stonewall, which was a beautiful 14 lightbox tribute using a lot of historical Xerox images from archives, from Google, from New York Times, to tell the story of Stormy DeLavery, who was the biracial butch woman who many people recall being the first person to be pulled into the NYPD paddy wagon and kind of telling people, you know, do something. And so L.J. Roberts really creates a memorial, a monument to this person who had an incredibly long life, who lived almost a century, and exploring that, like, her many lives in New Orleans as a drag performer and beyond, and thinking about what it means to have a trans ancestor that lived so long and that had such a beautiful life, because a lot of the other works in Heritage were also, and this is one of the commissions, so this is kind of behind the scenes image of L.J. Roberts in the studio before finalizing the sculpture and thinking about how, where, all that stuff. You mean, working with artists is always a pleasure to see them unfold their work. One of the second commissions in the show was Tourmaline Salacia. So if we think about Stormy DeLavery kind of being one of the figures in the Heritage section, another one would be Mary Jones. And what Tourmaline did was reach back into the 1830s and 1840s and look at trans ancestry long before Stonewall, and look at how that history of revolt and refusal has been centuries, you know, if not thousands of years in the making, and think about the histories and traces that New York carries. And so in Salacia, we see Mary Jones living in Central Park before the Seneca Village community there was moved and like expelled to create what Central Park is today. So also thinking about gentrification and the violence of that, like, that still continues today. Many artists, again, are kind of traversing through history through the lens of the present. And in the Heritage section in particular, the curators really felt it was very important to also highlighting kind of that history that we're losing now, right? Like what history is being made and who are we not mourning as we should be right now? And so David Antonio Cruz has been making for many years a series of portraits in which he honors murdered trans women, Black and brown trans women, often kind of recuperating them from media narratives where they might be misgendered or, not properly, respectfully discussed by either the police or even their families in many cases. And so David Antonio Cruz really creates this gorgeous, overwrought, very detailed, rich portrait body of work to honor them individually, right? And to think about, what would it mean if we actually centered them and honored them instead of these celebrities that we see on Vogue and what have you. So kind of mixing the kind of like uplift of portraiture with the very urgent reality that, we need to be thinking about heritage in the present and who we need to be protecting in the present. The third section was called Desire. In this section, we were playing a little bit with that desire for intimacy and sex and, closeness and all that good stuff, but also thinking about desire for better worlds. And so how those two things can really interact in special ways in the queer and trans communities. So it was really thinking about a time, hopefully not in the too distant future, when queer and trans life really can thrive and just be celebrated. And so one of the kind of most beautiful epic works in this section, hard to choose, but Levi and I were both talking about how much we loved this piece by Amaryllis de Jesus Molesky called Instructions for Freedom. I don't know if Levi, you want to chime in a little bit on this one?
This very fits with Desire. It's very mystical. It's very futuristic about an equitable future. And I think it's very rare to find queer art that has a mystical aspect to it. And it drew to me. That's all I have to say.
And this drawing is like, I can't remember exactly the dimensions, but I want to say it's like either 6 or 8 feet long. So it also is kind of like this giant scroll, right? A possibility where you see this brown femme sort of leading the new world to the future. And these are just such great drawings. If you ever have a chance to see Amaryllis' work in person or follow her on Instagram, a lot of like it's made with coffee and like ink stains. And so just really great details. And we were also really excited to bring forth the work of Mark Aguilar, a poet who was the only artist in the show who's no longer living, but her work was so incredibly influential to so many of the artists in the exhibition and, just to the world that we really felt it important to bring her into this kind of future-looking generational fold. And so we repeated in the galleries her wonderful poem, Litanies to My Heavenly Brown Body, in which we see kind of like a traditional Christian poem sort of turned on its head, a prayer that is calling for us to really protect and bless and honor some of the most marginalized and some of the folks that really are bearing the brunt of kind of the capitalist society that we find ourselves in and how we really should be thinking and foregrounding those people and those lives. So to kind of conclude here, the super quick overview of art, et cetera, the final section in the show was called Care Networks. And as Kat shouted out too, this was kind of, these were 4 themes, but the themes really carried across the whole show. Many of the artists shared themes across sections, and you could really see their work in so many different lights. But in this section specifically, looked at how systems of kinship and care and organizing created, a system of friendship and support, many times coming out of disability care networks, and thinking about how that can really undergird outward-facing activism and how that is kind of the necessary ground for getting out there and making change. And so you're seeing on the left another work by LJ Roberts. You saw their Lightbox Stormy at Stonewall piece. And so LJ normally works in textile, in this case, creating a giant map of queer collective housing in Brooklyn from 2011. And then this epic piece was a tribute to the Lavender Hill mixed gender commune, post-Stonewall commune in upstate New York, that still continues to this day. And it's reflected through the lens of a group of artists who were thinking about what it means to have these kind of ancestors who are still around today and who can illuminate that. So they actually did this really amazing remix in the style of a historical kind of gallery. This is called the Lavender Hill Historical Society. And they bring actual ephemera from the 70s in conversation with kind of recreated ephemera from today. And it was just a really joyful and hilarious kind of nod to those communities. And the section really concluded And if you've been to the Brooklyn Museum, you might know that we just kind of went in a giant circle around the gallery. So here you're seeing that first gallery with Electra KB's banner there in the center. But it concludes with the work of Jeffrey Gibson on the left, across from Mohammed Fayez and Poppy Juice on the right. And I loved this juxtaposition, not just in terms of material, with Jeff Gibson being an epic painter with a great sense of texture and color, and Mohammed being a digital illustrator who really brings forward community in these great kind of like sensual, beautifully shaded digital illustrations that were printed in vinyl. But thinking too about both of them centering the experience of club life and of dancing and of kind of like queer and trans places of just joy and connecting, because of course Stonewall itself happened at a bar, right? And these spaces where community building and just joy and love is possible. And so I loved this more intergenerational conversation, because Jeff was the oldest artist in the show and Mohammed was one of the youngest, and thinking about how that connective tissue of nightlife space was so important to so many of the activists during Stonewall, but certainly also just, you know, the continuation of queer and trans life here in New York today in a time of gentrification and change. And, you know, certainly with the COVID era, even more instability and change and grief. And so I think this is kind of a nice way to end the exhibition and reflect on all that. So I'll be handling the PowerPoint, but I'll turn it over to Levi to talk about our house.
So if you've ever been to the Brooklyn Museum for Saturdays or the Elizabeth A. Sackler Center for Feminist Art, this was a media room, mostly used for paneling and keynotes. And we wanted to engage our museum goers more, further than the art that they see in the exhibition. So we connected with architectures in the Brooklyn Museum to figure out a way where we can have people sit and engage in conversations and learn things that they never learned before, for allies, for everyone. So this is a little mock-up of how the room looked. On the bottom left, you can see there were shelves, and me, as well as the teens in one of the teen programs, our LGBTQI program, researched an extensive amount of books, films, local community gatherings, everything we can think of to include in this room. And we had art from Audre Lorde to James Baldwin, from children's books to the actual filming of the Gay Liberation Front in 1969. And here's another photo. We also had little prompts for people to engage and write notes about the exhibition. Yeah. And here's a little photo. As you can see, it's like a child's handwriting, but they say, "Dear gay ancestors, I'm sorry, but I'm making up for all shots not shot." And it was a very heartwarming experience to see just everyone in there and reading the works of literature and engaging with other people and writing their notes and expressing their feelings on the exhibition. And this is photos. The one on the right is actually Amaryllis de Jesus Valesky. The teens had the opportunity to engage with them and really speak about their piece. And yeah. And this is the exhibition and one of the turnouts, which was extremely exciting to see. There was another exhibition opening the same night, and it was so heartwarming to see our people come together as well as allies.
Absolutely. And like, yeah, when Levi and I were kind of walking down memory lane, we were remembering like, you know, at a museum like the Brooklyn Museum, where there's a lot of exhibitions happening at one time. And, you know, I remember having meetings where some of our, for instance, the special event staff, they were kind of like, well, since most of these are emerging artists without commercial galleries, surely they won't have that many people to invite to the party. And a lot of us on the collective team would be like, no, these artists have deep community, deep connections, and like, you better be ready for a big party. And they'd be like, oh, we're not too worried about it. And then this was just one of the most like exciting openings that I've ever been to, period, Brooklyn Museum or not. So these are just some tastes of, like, even at the opening, you know, you can see in the lower right, somebody was sitting with the headphones on, watching Happy Birthday, Marsha, amidst all the celebrations that were happening. Of course, this looks so different than our reality right now, but we also thought a lot about accessibility in the galleries and made sure every video had captions, had headphones, benches with back support, and that was also coming through the artist work too. So we talked a lot about impact and how some of the things that we did for the exhibition, you know, still inform the work in the Brooklyn Museum today, whether that's those accessibility questions. Oh wait, here's our curatorial collective. In the moment of celebration and joy, we're standing in front of Felipe Baez's work in the Desire section, and someone just snapped a photo. It's so packed that we barely were together as a group for more than like this one moment. But it was just a really exciting moment to see artists celebrating each other. And so just, yeah, like Levi said, kind of have a space for queer and trans brilliance to just be on full view at the Brooklyn Museum, to bring allies. And, you know, as the exhibition was on for many months and went on through the end of the year, long past kind of the Pride Month anniversaries and the more corporate celebrations of Stonewall, you know, folks really had a chance to sit and spend time with the show in really cool ways. We also got a lot of really great press. So, you know, the New York Times said that we were one of the best exhibitions of the year. Hyperallergic did too. And there was a lot of really great press in outlets like Teen Vogue or Them or NPR, where they were diving in specifically with artists, like in real depth. So that was thrilling to see. And yeah, we updated language around our bathrooms to make sure that everybody visiting the museum feels comfortable and safe. The Brooklyn Museum is always pay what you wish, except for special exhibitions. And in this case, we made thousands of free passes, just so people have that extra bonus of like, okay, I've got a free pass. Like, I don't have to ask anything at the front desk. And these were given out at Pride, at local bars, at programs. I mean, we could probably talk for much longer about all of those programs and things like that. But Levi, I don't know if you have any parting words for the PowerPoint to reflect on the impact.
I just like to say that this was an amazing, amazing, amazing experience. And the turnout was even better, and the recognition as well. And being able to even turn the bathrooms into gender neutral bathrooms was a big, big deal. Yeah.
Cool. So that's the end of the PowerPoint. I also have to share so we can have a Q&A, but happy to bring up any slides if you want to look closer at art or any of those things that we just saw. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Carmen and Levi. That was an amazing tour. I feel like I got a chance to tour the exhibition all over again, and you took everyone here who's seen it or hadn't seen it through both your process and the exhibition itself. So I really appreciate your words. So we are, the Q&A is open, and I welcome folks to post questions. We'd love questions for anybody who is here attending, but I know especially that there are Gallery Museum Studies students who have done additional readings and prepared with some questions. So I'll look for those to come in on the Q&A shortly. But I think that I'd love to return to this question or this idea of impact, because I know you kind of opened, Carmen, with that incredible image of the march in June outside of the Brooklyn Museum, juxtaposed with an image from the exhibition. And then Levi, I think you kind of closed with this idea of impact in relationship to the fact that the bathrooms were changed to gender neutral. And this was like so you have this very large, somewhat spontaneous seeming activity outside of the Brooklyn Museum that does have some links to literally to this exhibition. And then you have this other thing happening inside the museum that's incredibly impactful, that has direct links to the exhibition. And I'm always talking to students about just, and other museum professionals about just this, about the impact of our work, how the content of our work as museum professionals, but then also the way we work, like whether we work collaboratively, whether we share authority, who we choose to work with, like what that can mean. So I'm wondering if you, either of you or both of you, could reflect or share a little bit more about this idea of impact, maybe reflecting on that image outside the museum, sharing a little more about some of those connections or any other area.
I don't know, Levi, would you like to reflect first, or whatever your preference is?
You can go first.
Yeah, it's a really important question, because I think, you know, one of the kind of realities of working collaboratively is that you bring up a lot more than or kind of earlier or in different ways, the questions of things like accessibility, or like I recall during installation, and like all 5 curators and Levi would pop in too. We were there for install, right? It's not like we delegated, okay, Carmen writes wall labels, Ali does install, Margot does education. Like we were all a part of everything. And I think internally folks were really surprised by that. And, you know, it is hard to schedule a meeting with 6 curators, right? That's a fact. But I think the positives obviously outweighed that reality. So I see like the legacy of this kind of collaborative curatorial work. And it wasn't the first time at the museum, but it was the first time that it was not within the curatorial department. It really was across the museum. But then we're in install and we're talking about, okay, well, in the layout, we had Camilo Godoy's pieces in front of El Perez's pieces to have a conversation there. But Lindsay said something of, you know, it's a wasted opportunity, because it would be really beautiful to be able to sit school groups in front of El Perez's black and white photographs of queer and trans, like just communities and nightlife and outdoor festivals and more. And so that's something that, like, as a kind of, you know, art curator who's come up through like curatorial departments, yes, I think about those things, but it was really important to think about them early, you know, and to have that conversation like, wow, okay, yeah, like that is so true. And I think that collaborative nature is just kind of an emblem of what this impact was at the institution itself. But then also, like you said, Kat, you know, amazing to see the Brooklyn Liberation March, in which one of the artists in the exhibition, Mohammed Fayez, they were a co-organizer, right? And so they made the poster and they made the calls. And I think it was so wonderful to see that kind of outpouring of support for the trans community, you know, its ongoing crisis, the violence that they experienced. But it was just really incredible to see amidst the Summer of Black Lives Matter protests throughout the city, to see a silent march, right? People taking, you know, wearing white and just holding space together, you know, and there were just incredible speeches. Laineen Polanco's sister, I'll never forget, you know, she was addressing the crowd. There were massive speakers from the pavilion. You know, the museum was closed because of COVID, and that's what our plaza allows, right? Like, it's a public plaza. You can go hang out there at any time. And that was like, you know, it wasn't because of the exhibition, but I think the exhibition in some ways tracks that change and tracks that community. And I remember, you know, talking about some of these historical Stonewall shows, right? And how many of them felt very whitewashed. And as a collective, we would often talk about, you know, I hear that this show about Stonewall in 1969, you know, doesn't have many Black and brown artists because they quote unquote can't find them. And, you know, you start to think about whose archives are kept, whose stories are preserved, you know, thinking about how the AIDS crisis impacts queer artists specifically, and how a whole generation of making and stories, you know, is that much harder to find. So we really wanted the impact of the show to be, you know, these 28 artists. And again, I just skimmed it, so I didn't even get to most of the artists in the show, but thinking about like, okay, here's the context, here's the curatorial kind of like impact of these artists together in conversation, so that 50 years from now, people can look at Nobody Promised You Tomorrow and they won't be asking, oh, where are they? We can't find them. But this exhibition was specifically uphold those communities. And the show is actually traveling this year. So it's going to the University of, California College of the Arts at Fresno. And they're adding some West Coast artists. And so there's going to be kind of an interesting conversation there too of, you know, how this meaning of the show has transformed too, like through COVID and beyond. So yeah. I don't know if Levi, you want to chime in with other impact reflections?
Yes, of course. Just to follow up what you were saying in the beginning about the collaborative aspect, we really did there were so many departments, different departments and people in different departments that worked on this, from librarians to architects to the curators to the teens and to the actual artists. And I, at the moment, did not realize how much the community needed this until I actually saw the amount of people in there and the questions that were being asked during specific keynotes, and the snowballing aspect from getting invited to the Brooklyn Public Library to speak about the exhibition, and having Adidas invite me as well as the teens to go in and paint a school bus based on the exhibition. And still to this day, we can talk about it, and it's just so heartwarming and something well needed in all communities all around the world, honestly.
Thank you both. I really appreciate that. It's that question of impact means so much, because it makes us all think about that work. What are the incredible possibilities for the work we do? And now I'm happy to see some questions coming in from various folks, including some students as well. So Christine Beatty has two questions, so I'll group those together. She said, what was the selection of the artists like? Did you have an open call? And then she asked if there are any specific books on queer artists that you'd recommend, or specific other exhibitions that you drew inspiration from. And we've got a bunch more questions, so let's go for some shorter answers on these.
Yeah, so I can speak really briefly to the kind of selection process. Working in this collective and starting to dream up, okay, what would this exhibition look like, right? Like I said, like a work like Happy Birthday, Marsha, reimagining Marsha P. Johnson's Night at Stonewall, like it was at the top of so many people's minds. But the beauty of working with so many curators was also that there were kind of layers into, we did not do an open call, but we had what we were calling retreats, where we would just like carve out 4 hours, go off site, not be accessible in the office, and just kind of share with each other. Oh, I've been looking at Felipe Baeza, and I think he has a really interesting, and other people might not know Felipe. Or when folks were talking about Muhammad, I was sort of like, I don't know if the vinyl is going to really look great. Like, I don't know how digital illustration fits in a gallery. And so those collaborative conversations extended all the way to the checklist building. And we had the summer of 2018 was when we did a lot of the studio visits. So we go to artist studios, talk to them about their work. For most of the artists, we asked them, what does Stonewall mean to you? And some folks were, full of kind of rage. Some people were full of gratitude. Like, there was just a really interesting variance between the artists. And some of those artists would say, hey, you should go check out XYZ artists because they're thinking about this too. And so it was really beautiful to see that community kind of like that, the community really come through, even in the way, I want to be in this Brooklyn Museum show, I'm going to keep this to myself, but actually being like, let me share. And so from a very long list of incredible artists, we eventually whittled it down, and the themes came out of the artists, but then the themes also influenced the artists. And so we eventually got to a place of these 28 artists. And, of course, you look back and you're like, oh my God, this almost ran so great, whatever. But like, I think we were really interested in creating like multiple ways to see each artist's work. So a lot of the artists appeared more than once. And so showing a little bit of depth in their work too, which is sometimes rare for a group show.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of unfolding research, going to other shows, going to studios. Instagram is always really helpful for seeing what artists are up to kind of on the fly.
So any favorite like other exhibitions that were an inspiration, Levi or Carmen, or any particular books that came up? I mean, you can make a whole bibliography, and there's no time for that today, but if there's anything that comes to mind, do you have anything that comes to mind immediately you want to share? Or should we go on to the next question?
Actually I have one to show.
Oh yeah, let's bring it out. It's always nice to have a visual on Zoom, in addition to everybody's lovely faces.
Okay, number one I would like to add is the Faggots and Their Friends. It's it's an amazing book, and it also plays off when we were talking about Amaryllis's work, about like the mystical, futuristic aspect of queer identity and the equitable future that we would like to see. And also Uses of Anger, of course, by Audre Lorde. And then we have No Tea, No Shade, which is a collection of poems by Black queer artists. Yes, this is a very important book, and I always run back to it. I'll show the.
And then I think shall I jump on to the next question? Yeah, okay. Ariel Rodriguez from our Gallery Museum Studies program, she is asking, I wanted to know about creating the exhibition. Is there something specific you learned personally from it, that you didn't know before?
So I did not come from a curatorial background or let's say an academia background. And I learned so much every step of the way. I was learning about how exhibitions get built, how these panels get organized and form, and how these artists, their process between making their art and then making it appropriate enough to be in an exhibition. So all throughout the way, it was a learning experience for me.
Excellent. I'm going to keep going unless Carmen, because we've got some more questions coming in. Alexia Wang, also from the Museum Studies program at QCC, asks, do you think museums should closely follow the social trends and reflect the current focuses of society at that pace? It's a big question. Either Carmen?
That is a big question. And I think, as somebody who had formerly worked at the Guggenheim, which has its own narrative of non-objective art and the history of abstraction, I think what attracted me to the Brooklyn Museum is that they, in some ways, right, it's not a perfect museum, but in some ways they have historically been way more responsive than most of the other museums in New York. And so that historically can be traced in 1968, where protests in Crown Heights at the Brooklyn Museum that were saying that the Brooklyn Museum does not serve Crown Heights. Where are we, right? Caribbean and Black communities specifically, sort of pushing back against, as Levi is saying, this kind of academic curatorial expertise, we know what you want to see. And so I think that has had, over the decades, a compounding where that's in some ways the reason why we have a feminist art center, right? Because the Brooklyn Museum is a place that was able to be let's do this, in a time when it was not so kind of popular as it might seem today. And I think it's hard because museums are slow and creaky and colonial and racist institutions at their making and their core. But I think these conversations that are happening now can help inform museums. And I know the Brooklyn Museum, we do want to be a museum where we feel like it actually engages with people's everyday lives, right? And I think what I love about working at the Brooklyn Museum is that it makes sense for me and Levi to be thinking about that in a contemporary sense where it feels like it is more natural. But I love too that our historic curators in the Egyptian galleries, in the Asian galleries, they're thinking about how to draw narratives that, you might look to the historical art and think, oh, this doesn't relate to me today. But a lot of the same questions of gender, of power, of, even going beyond the gender binary, those all have historical precedents in art. And how can we kind of make those connections across time? I feel like it's a really interesting angle, but it's interesting too, because it's these formal ways of dealing with society and reality can also be clunky, because it's we had about a year and a half to prepare for Nobody Promised Me Tomorrow, which some museums might see as a very short time frame, but it was actually kind of a good time frame at Brooklyn. We kind of work on shorter time frames, which I think is one of the reasons maybe our exhibitions feel more responsive, right? If Nobody Promised Me Tomorrow had a 5-year lead time where we were reading every single book that ever was about queer history, I think it would be a very different show than sort of taking the inspiration from the moment and the artists we were meeting. And yeah, so I think it's a really important question, and one that I think we kind of keep that pressure on, right? Because right now we see a lot of museums saying yes, we're in for it, we're doing it, but that happened in 1968, it happened in the 80s, it happened in the early 90s, and so it's sort of these demands of museums are kind of cyclical, so it's sort of got to keep that pressure on from the inside, from the outside, everywhere it can come from. So.
Sorry, do you want to respond to all of this question of how much you want to see museums reflecting on the, the pace of society and the new things that we see happening, Levi?
I will reflect a little bit. I think that's an amazing, like very important aspect to the, I think museums should. Like Carmen said, they're very creaky and a little bit old, and I know they go through archives and go through different pieces that are a little bit older. But I think it's very important to also add contemporary artists and current situations and issues that we're going through in the world. I think it's very engaging for lots of people.
Thanks, Levi. I think we'll probably have time for one more question, but maybe I'll just add a little about why also we were interested in having this particular conversation. When I was thinking about what I'd heard that you and Carmen and the rest of your team had been doing and organizing, and how you organized the exhibition, I thought of the most recent exhibition at the previously at the Kupferberg Holocaust Center that I'd worked on with Danielle Means, who's a Oglala Lakota, and a whole team of community committee who are some second generation Holocaust survivors, folks who are from the community around the center, previous docents, and students too, and a lot of different Indigenous knowledge keepers. And the process that we had created to build an exhibition and try to bring in a lot of different voices and a lot of different kinds of knowledge, not just academic knowledge, even though we're on a campus, and not just knowledge from one survivor community, but knowledge from multiple different kinds of survivor communities. And that exact thing that you both described is kind of creaky process, but if you can give it enough time, you can learn from from that kind of process. You can change, right? You can change what happens next. You can create something different. And sometimes that's like in the minds of the people working together who learn new things, which we all did and all of you did. And then it's also, I think that process, that rich process, can potentially be reflected in what you put out to the community and what people get from those materials. So I'm so grateful. I think actually, because I see that is almost the end of our time, I just think I want to say how grateful I am for what the two of you and the rest of the team at the Brooklyn Museum built. And I want to say also how grateful I am for the community around Queensborough and the Kupferberg Holocaust Center, which also has allowed for that kind of incredible, learning experience that has real impact, can have real impact inside the KHC, inside the Brooklyn Museum, inside the Queensborough Community College, but then so much broader and bigger and outside that, sometimes more than we know, even those who are working on it. I think that in closing, I'd like to just share, sorry, one moment. I'd just like to share an upcoming event that's very relevant to some of the things that we talked about today. And also, I think if turn back the screen or the mic to the incredible director of the center, Dr. Laura Cohen. So thank you for hosting and collaborating on this today.
Thank you so much, Kat. Thank you so much, Carmen. Thank you so much, Levi. Thank you to Victoria. I think that it's been a learning process for the Kupferberg Holocaust Center and our community. And I think so many times when we're talking about the relevancy of Holocaust education, and we focus so much on never again. But I think when we think about just talking about the Holocaust, in fact, Holocaust education is about human rights promotion. It's about social justice education and making these clear connections. That's what never again means. It means about being an activist. It means about reaching out to other communities and making sure that we understand that the Holocaust isn't just about the process of killing people. It is about the process by which people are delegitimized, that people are targeted, that people are terrorized. And by the time we get to murder, we've already missed so many opportunities as a society to step in. So I'm really grateful to all of you for attending today. And Kat, thank you so much for mentioning our upcoming event. For more events, you can check out the KHC's website. We've got a host of different programs, and all of our events are being recorded each semester, so you can find that too. We hope all of you stay safe and be well. Thank you.